let's get one thing straight. Chasing someone who pulls away isn't love. It's fear disguised as effort. And if you've ever found yourself overthinking texts, walking on eggshells, or feeling like you're auditioning for someone's attention, you're not alone. You're dealing with an avoidant, someone who fears closeness just as much as they crave it. Now, here's the truth that nobody tells you. You cannot reach an avoidant's heart by running after them. The more you chase, the more they retreat. So today, we're flipping the script. We're going to talk about how to connect with someone who protects their heart like a fortress without losing yourself in the process. To truly reach an avoidant's heart, you first have to understand the mindset they live in, not to excuse their behavior, but to stop personalizing it. Avoidantly attached people often carry deep, unhealed wounds from early emotional experiences. These wounds taught them one painful lesson: intimacy is not safe. It might have been a parent who was inconsistent, distant, overly critical, or emotionally unavailable. Or maybe love came with conditions: praise when they performed, silence when they didn't. Whatever the origin, the result is the same. Closeness triggers a survival instinct, not comfort. So when you try to get closer, when you open your heart or express needs, you might notice them pulling away. You might feel punished, ignored, or confused. But what's really happening is that they're overwhelmed. Emotional closeness, even something as simple as a vulnerable conversation or a consistent show of care, can make an avoidant feel like they're about to be engulfed, controlled, or judged. They don't withdraw because you did something wrong. They withdraw because the closeness itself triggers fear. And that's where most people mess up. We take their silence personally. We assume the worst. We panic and chase. We say more, do more, give more. We try to fix the distance by closing it with effort. But from their perspective, that energy feels invasive. It confirms their fear that connection means losing space and autonomy, that love means pressure. And so they retreat even further, and you feel even more rejected. The cycle begins. And that cycle is exhausting. And it's usually where relationships with avoidance break down, not because there wasn't love, but because there wasn't understanding. You can't fix what you don't see. You have to start seeing the avoidance behavior for what it truly is, a protective reflex. It doesn't mean they don't care. In fact, some avoidants care so deeply that it scares them. They'll ghost you for weeks while thinking about you every day. They'll pull away just when things start feeling good because good feels unstable. To them, real connection feels like standing on a cliff's edge, exhilarating but dangerous. So they step back, not because they don't want you, but because they don't know how to feel safe wanting you. And here's the paradox. The more you try to convince them that you're safe, that you're not like everyone else, that you'll stay, the more it triggers their instinct to test or retreat. Why? Because trust for them isn't built through words or promises. It's built through experience, through consistency, through you holding your ground without shoving your way in. It's built through calm presence, not emotional pressure. If they sense that your love depends on their response, they'll shut down. But if they sense that you are whole with or without them, they begin to relax, not right away, not dramatically, but gradually. Their nervous system stops sounding the alarm. So the goal isn't to change the avoidant, it's to change your approach. You have to stop trying to be enough to make them feel safe and start being grounded enough in yourself that their reactions don't unbalance you. Because when you stop taking their withdrawal personally, you stop reacting, and your emotional steadiness becomes the very thing that makes you trustworthy. And for an avoidant, trust is the first brick in the wall of love. Not passion, not intensity, just simple, reliable, non-threatening trust. That kind of presence, calm, clear, and self-respecting, is what starts to melt their defenses. Not because you're fixing them, but because you're no longer feeding the fear that connection equals control. You're showing up as someone who values connection, but doesn't beg for it. Someone who can see their fear without becoming a prisoner of it. That's what starts to open an avoidant's heart, not pressure, not pursuit, but the quiet strength of someone who sees them and stays rooted in themselves. One of the most common traps people fall into when dealing with an avoidant partner is the habit of overgiving. It's subtle at first. You sense distance, so you try to close it. You offer reassurance, send a kind message, maybe plan something thoughtful. But when that goes unanswered or unreciprocated, you double down. You give more, you bend more. You shrink your needs to seem easy. You justify their behavior to yourself. You work overtime to create a sense of connection because you're trying to prove that you're safe, that you're worthy, that they should stay. And at first glance, it feels like love. You tell yourself you're just being caring, patient, loyal, but underneath that effort is often a hidden fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear that if you don't do more, the whole thing will fall apart. That fear turns love into labor. And here's the problem. Overgiving doesn't bring an avoidant closer. It actually drives them further away. Why? Because overgiving, even with the best intentions, often comes with unspoken expectations. You're not just giving, you're giving to get. You want a response, you want closeness, you want to feel secure. And when the avoidant doesn't meet those expectations, you feel rejected, which causes pain, which triggers more giving in a desperate attempt to fix the gap. But to an avoidant, this kind of dynamic feels suffocating. They sense that your calm depends on their validation, that your love is really a request. Please soothe me, please change, please come closer so I can stop feeling anxious. And that makes them pull away even harder. But the avoidant nervous system is wired to protect itself from enmeshment. Overgiving, though it appears generous, sends the message that you're trying to merge, that your emotional state is tied to theirs. It feels like pressure. And for someone who has learned that closeness equals loss of control, that pressure is intolerable. So even if they care deeply, even if they think about you constantly, they'll start to disengage. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. This is why it's so important to catch yourself when you start giving out of fear. Giving out of love is calm, it's grounded, it comes with no strings. But giving out of fear is frantic, it's transactional. It silently says, I hope this makes you stay. And the moment you attach your worth or your security to how much you give, you start to lose your center. You stop being a partner and you become a performer. And relationships built on performance are unsustainable for you and for them. The real work is to recognize that your worth isn't measured by how much you can tolerate or how much you can give. You don't earn love by over-connectioning. You don't create safety by erasing your needs. In fact, the most magnetic thing you can do, especially with an avoidant, is not to overextend, is to show that you can hold your own center, even when they retreat, that you can care without overreaching, that you're generous, but not at the cost of self-respect. This doesn't mean you stop being kind or stop making effort altogether. It means your giving becomes intentional, not desperate. It means you start asking yourself, am I doing this from love or from fear? Every time you reach out, every time you offer support. If the answer is fear, pause. Reconnect with yourself. Remind yourself that you are not responsible for managing someone else's emotions or avoiding their discomfort. You are responsible for showing up with integrity, and that includes respecting your own boundaries and needs. When you stop overgiving, you create space. And that space is exactly what an avoidant needs to process their own emotions without feeling invaded. You stop sending the message that you'll do anything to keep them, and you start sending the message that you're whole on your own, that you want connection but not at the expense of your peace, that you're not asking them to complete you, you're inviting them to join you. That shift is powerful, because when someone with avoidant tendencies sees that you can stay rooted without chasing, that you can care without collapsing, they begin to relax. They begin to feel less like they're being managed and more like they're being respected. And that respect, that calm, grounded energy is what builds real intimacy over time. Not frantic effort, not proving your worth, just steady, quiet confidence in your own. Emotional detachment isn't about becoming cold or indifferent. It's about creating the space you need to see clearly, respond calmly, and protect your peace, especially when you're dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies. When you're emotionally entangled, everything they do feels personal. Every silence feels like a rejection. Every delayed reply feels like a verdict on your worth. You become hyper aware of their moods, their distance, their inconsistency, and before you know it, you're no longer in a relationship, you're in a constant state of analysis, trying to decode their behavior instead of living your own life. This is where emotional detachment becomes essential. It allows you to pull your energy back from their reactions and bring it home to yourself. It's the shift from needing their closeness to feel okay to realizing that your stability doesn't have to depend on their availability. It's the difference between being in love and losing yourself in love. When you're emotionally detached in a healthy way, you stop trying to control the outcome. You stop performing, chasing, fixing. You start observing instead of absorbing, and that changes everything. Most people think detachment means not caring, but that's not true. You can love someone deeply and still detach emotionally from their moods, fears, or withdrawal patterns. You can have compassion for their struggle without letting it consume you. You can show up with empathy without losing your identity, because emotional detachment is not about shutting your heart down. It's about holding your heart steady even when someone else is unpredictable. Avoidants often struggle with emotional regulation. They retreat, they get overwhelmed, they go silent. Not to hurt you, but because connection triggers old defense mechanisms. If you're overly attached to their behavior, you'll ride every wave with them. You'll panic when they pull back. You'll try to solve emotions that aren't even yours. But if you're emotionally detached, you give both of you room to breathe. You allow them to sit with their own discomfort without rushing in to fix it. You allow yourself to stay grounded instead of reactive. And you break the cycle of emotional dependency, which is the very thing that keeps the dynamics stuck. Detachment gives you your power back. Because now, instead of being on edge, wondering when they'll text, call, or open up again, you're focused on what you need. You're choosing peace over obsession. You're staying present in your own life instead of orbiting theirs. And paradoxically, this is often when the avoidance starts to come closer, because suddenly they don't feel your anxiety reaching for them. They don't feel your emotional grip tightening. They sense your calm, your self-respect, your energy returning to you. That calmness feels safe, not because you're proving your worth, but because you've stopped making them responsible for it. When you detach emotionally, you also start seeing the relationship more clearly. You're no longer wearing the lenses of fear or fantasy. You're not trying to make potential feel like reality. You're not overvaluing crumbs of connection because you're starved for validation. You're able to ask honest questions like, is this relationship actually meeting my needs? Am I being true to myself here? Am I holding on out of love or out of fear of letting go? Emotional detachment creates clarity. It helps you see what's real, not just what you hope is real. And if the avoidant never comes closer, if the relationship doesn't deepen, if the connection continues to feel one-sided, emotional detachment allows you to walk away with dignity, not devastation. Because you weren't chasing, you weren't losing yourself to keep someone who was never ready. You were grounded the entire time. That's strength, that's maturity, that's love with boundaries. The truth is, love without emotional detachment often turns into emotional chaos. You can't love someone fully if you're constantly losing yourself in the process. And you can't expect someone with avoidant tendencies to give you emotional safety when you haven't yet learned to give it to yourself. Detachment isn't rejection, it's protection, not of your walls, but of your center. And the more you master it, the more powerful and peaceful you become, no matter what the other person chooses to do. When you're trying to build a connection with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, it's natural to want clarity. You want to know where you stand. You want to feel secure. You want them to show up with the same level of emotional investment you're offering. And when that doesn't happen, when they pull away, get quiet, or seem emotionally unavailable, it's easy to reach for ultimatums. You might find yourself thinking, if they don't commit by this date, I'm done. Or if they don't start opening up, I'll walk away. And while boundaries and standards are essential, it's important to understand the difference between a boundary and an ultimatum. One invites respect, the other often provokes fear or defensiveness. Avoidant individuals are wired to guard their autonomy. They associate closeness with a potential loss of control. So when you issue an ultimatum, when your love starts sounding like a demand instead of an invitation, they don't hear your pain or your needs. They hear a threat to their independence. Even if your heart is coming from a place of genuine desire for connection, your words might land as pressure. And for an avoidant, pressure triggers one thing: distance. That's why leading with boundaries, not ultimatums, is key. A boundary is about you. It's not a tool to manipulate someone into doing what you want. It's not you have to change or I leave. It's here's what I'm available for. Here's what I will or won't participate in. Here's what I need to feel healthy and whole. A boundary says, I choose me. And in doing that, it also gives the other person the freedom to choose for themselves without emotional blackmail or coercion. This isn't easy, especially when you've invested time and emotion into someone, especially when you see their potential and believe in what the relationship could be. But here's the hard truth. You cannot force someone to meet you where you are. You cannot inspire change by threatening departure. The only way to truly shift a dynamic is to get crystal clear on what you need and be willing to walk away if it isn't honored. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. When you communicate boundaries from a calm, grounded place, something powerful happens. You stop trying to get the other person to behave differently. You stop hoping your emotional intensity will wake them up. And you start taking responsibility for your role in the dynamic. You stop blaming and start deciding. That shift, where you move from reaction to clarity, often commands more respect than any speech or plea ever could. For an avoidant, this kind of calm clarity is disarming. It's not loud, it's not emotional chaos. It doesn't feel like pressure, it feels like stability. And for someone who associates love with unpredictability or control, that kind of grounded presence is rare. It might not trigger immediate closeness, but it creates space for reflection. It invites curiosity instead of resistance. It makes them ask, often quietly, why isn't this person panicking? Why aren't they chasing? Why do they feel so clear? And sometimes That's what starts to open the door. But whether they walk through that door or not is their choice. Your job isn't to push them. Your job is to honor yourself. That's what leading with boundaries looks like. It's not a tactic to make someone love you. It's a declaration that you already love yourself. And from that place, you don't beg for connection, you embody it. Remember, boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the framework that protects love. They are how you teach someone how to treat you. And when you're dealing with an avoidant, boundaries are how you show them that intimacy doesn't have to mean losing freedom, that connection can coexist with space, that love doesn't have to be chaos or collapse. It can be two whole people choosing each other freely. You don't need to threaten to leave to be taken seriously. You just need to know that you can leave if necessary and still be at peace. That kind of inner strength does more than change relationships. It transforms you. It says, I don't chase, I choose. I don't pressure, I invite. I don't control, I lead. Quietly, powerfully, unapologetically. Creating safety without pressure is one of the most powerful ways to reach an avoidance heart, but it requires a high level of self-awareness and patience. Most people approach connection from their own attachment needs, meaning if you lean more anxious or crave closeness, your instinct is to build emotional safety by closing the gap as quickly as possible. You want open communication, constant reassurance, and consistent validation. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, though, those very things can feel like emotional demands rather than gestures of love. They're not experiencing your efforts as nurturing. They're experiencing them as overwhelming. And the harder you push, the more they feel unsafe, not because of who you are, but because of how they're wired. Avoidants often struggle to feel safe in close emotional environments because they were conditioned to believe that vulnerability is risky. In childhood or early life, expressing needs may have led to disappointment, criticism, or shame. Their safety came from independence, self-reliance, and keeping their feelings locked away. So when someone shows up ready to connect emotionally, even with warmth and good intentions, it doesn't automatically translate as safe. In fact, it can trigger alarm bells. They may feel like they're losing control, like expectations are piling up, or like they'll disappoint you if they can't match your emotional depth. So they pull back, not because they don't care, but because care itself feels dangerous. That's where your work comes in. You can't create safety by chasing. You can't create safety by insisting, demanding, or analyzing. You create safety by becoming a calm, grounded presence who gives space without resentment. That doesn't mean you tolerate distance forever or ignore your own needs. It means you give the right kind of space, space with emotional openness, not emotional absence. You don't withdraw to punish or play games. You hold steady. You communicate clearly, then release the outcome. You demonstrate that connection with you is available, but not forced. That your love doesn't suffocate, it invites. This kind of presence is rare. Most people, when they feel hurt or rejected, either shut down or push harder. But safety comes from consistency, not pressure. It comes from someone who says, with their actions more than their words, I'm here, I see you, I'm not going to chase you or abandon myself to keep you. That energy is magnetic because it doesn't trigger the avoidance defenses. It gives them space to lean in when they are ready, not when you need them to. It also means honoring silence without assuming the worst. Sometimes avoidants go quiet to process. They withdraw, not to manipulate, but to regulate. If you meet that silence with anxiety, endless texts, emotional pleas, or passive-aggressive comments, you confirm their fear that connection means chaos. But if you meet it with calm acceptance, you allow them to experience something different, someone who can tolerate their distance without falling apart. That kind of emotional resilience is powerful. It shows them that intimacy doesn't have to be a trap. At the same time, you're not abandoning your truth. Creating safety doesn't mean self-erasure. You still communicate your needs, you just do it without emotional pressure. You speak from clarity, not urgency. Instead of saying, "Why don't you ever open up to me?" you say, "I value connection and open communication. I'm here when you're ready to share." That kind of language lands differently. It feels respectful. It gives them agency. And agency is everything to someone who fears losing control. The real paradox is that the more you release your need to control the emotional outcome, the more likely it is that the avoidant begins to feel safe enough to meet you. But even if they don't, even if they stay stuck in their patterns, you haven't betrayed yourself. You've shown up with integrity, grace, and strength. You've proven to yourself that love can be steady, that you can offer openness without chasing, that you can want connection without abandoning yourself. And that's what real emotional safety looks like, not just for them, but for you. You're no longer operating from fear. You're not grasping. You're not molding yourself into someone else's emotional comfort zone. You're standing in your own. And from that place, love becomes a choice, not a chase. The moment you stop waiting is the moment everything begins to shift, not just in your dynamic with the avoidant, but within yourself. Waiting often feels like love. It feels patient, devoted, romantic even. You tell yourself you're giving them space, that you're understanding their fear of intimacy, that with enough time they'll come around. But slowly, quietly, waiting becomes something else. It becomes stagnation. You put your life on hold. You shrink your own desires. You delay your joy, your decisions, your needs. And beneath all that waiting is a hope that they'll eventually change, that they'll recognize your loyalty and finally offer you the closeness you crave. But love isn't meant to be a life on pause. And real connection doesn't grow in silence, ambiguity, or one-sided sacrifice. When you wait for someone with avoidant tendencies to be ready, you often do it at the cost of your own readiness. You start minimizing your emotional hunger. You downplay the things you want just to stay palatable. You settle for breadcrumbs and start calling it patience. But this kind of waiting isn't stillness. It's self-abandonment. It trains your nervous system to tolerate inconsistency. It teaches you to accept less while hoping for more. And that constant hope, that attachment to someday, becomes a prison. You stop living for now and start living for a future you can't control. Avoidants often stay in relationships longer than they should because they feel safest when things are vague. If you're available without asking for much, if you wait without questioning, if you stay without expressing what's real for you, they don't feel pressure, but they also don't feel urgency. They have no reason to self-reflect or evolve because your loyalty creates the illusion that things are fine. But emotional growth doesn't happen in comfort zones. Sometimes the avoidant only begins to confront their own patterns when they experience the consequence of them, when they lose access to someone who showed up with love, but refused to disappear in the waiting room of the relationship. The power of no longer waiting doesn't lie in threatening to leave. It lies in choosing to live. To stop centering your emotional world around their fear of intimacy, to stop measuring your worth by how much pain you can hold without complaining. When you stop waiting, you shift your focus from them to you. You begin making decisions that honor your values, your timing, your truth. You start to take up space in your own life again. Remember that love isn't earned by proving your patience. It's felt in mutual presence, choice, and availability. Letting go of the weight isn't about giving up on the person. It's about giving up on the fantasy. It's about releasing the version of the relationship that lives only in your hope and grounding yourself in what's actually being offered. And if what's being offered is distance, delay, and emotional unavailability, you're allowed to say, I want more, not from a place of blame, but from a place of clarity. You're allowed to want someone who doesn't just need time, but also knows how to use that time to build something with you. You stop waiting, you stop managing someone else's potential, you stop negotiating with reality, you stop feeding a connection that only grows when you're the one doing the work. And you begin inviting a new energy into your life, an energy of alignment, not effort. The right person doesn't make you wait indefinitely. They meet you in the presence. They show you through their consistency that you don't have to chase, perform, or shrink to earn their presence. And yes, the moment you stop waiting might be the moment the avoidant finally feels your absence and begins to reevaluate. But that's not the point. The point is that you're not living your life on standby anymore. You're not sitting in limbo, waiting for someone to choose you so you can finally choose yourself. You're leading your life. And in doing that, you reclaim not just your power, but your peace. Let's be honest. Loving someone with avoidant tendencies can feel like trying to hold water in your hands. No matter how tightly you try to grasp it, it slips through. And the more you chase, the further they seem to run. But what if the path to deeper connection isn't in doing more, but in doing differently? What if the key isn't about breaking into their heart, but about standing so solidly in your own that they feel safe enough to open them? This journey isn't about fixing them. It's not about waiting for them to finally become who you know they could be. It's about choosing to become someone who doesn't need to beg, shrink, or sacrifice themselves for love. Someone who communicates with clarity, leads with self-respect, and honors their needs without apology. Because the truth is, when you stop chasing, when you stop waiting, when you start living from your own center, that's when you stop surviving relationships and start transforming them. If they're capable of rising to meet you, they will. If they're not, you'll already be on a path that doesn't rely on their readiness. Either way, you win. Because love doesn't live in pressure. It lives in presence. And you deserve the kind of love that meets you there.